Hello and welcome to Paddock Project. I'm your host, Tiggy, and I have one of the most exciting guests in our podcast's history. Not to put too much pressure on you, James, but I am here with none other than James Gay-Rees, the executive producer of Drive to Survive, co-founder of Box to Box Films, documentary production company that is responsible for Drive to Survive, among many other award-winning pieces. James, you've also produced Senna, Amy, you have Onside coming up for MLS. Welcome to the podcast and thank you for being here.
No, a pleasure. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, this is an F1 podcast, so we're going to primarily focus
Yeah.
on Drive to Survive, but I'm a huge fan of all of your work. So, just to start out, whose idea was Drive to Survive? Did F1 or Liberty Media come to you, or did you pitch them? What's the sort of origin story?
So, as far as I remember it, because it was quite a long time ago now, I think what happened was I went to a CAA Sport networking event in London with my partner Paul Martin, who runs the LA office, and we bumped into some of the marketing team from Red Bull Formula One
Hmm.
team, and I think I was introduced as the person who made Senna, so we got talking about that, and everybody in Formula One loves that film, which is great. And so they said we want to do our own piece of our own show. People didn't call it content then; they just said we want to do our own documentary. Um, and so we ended up working a series around the Red Bull Formula One team, Red Bull Racing, and we took that to Liberty Media as a proposal. And we had this fancy teaser, and we had a deck, and we did this whole thing. And this really amazing guy called Sean Bratches, who'd been brought in by Liberty from ESPN to be the sort of marketing officer of the new Formula
Hmm.
One under the Liberty Media ownership, who's great. He's got these incredible bushy eyebrows. He's like a real Southern gent. I'm really fond of him, actually. He's left now, but he's such a great guy. He was just like, wait, you're wasting your time. This is a waste of time. I'm not going to do this. But we are talking to Netflix about doing a show around the entire sport.
Wow.
Do you want to do that? I was like, yeah, yeah, totally. So we'd been having sort of parallel conversations with Formula One, with Netflix, and with him. Um, but it all coalesced and came together very quickly after that.
Wow.
Incredibly, fortunately for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was literally just like out of one option into a much bigger option. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's what happened.
Was Red Bull miffed at all that it was turning into a much larger
No, I think listen,
situation?
they're still front and center of the
Yeah,
series
of
pretty much. Do you know what I mean? So in
course.
fact, we're having our annual arm wrestle with Red Bull as we speak, which is good sport. But no, it's fine, and I'm still very close to all the Red Bull people, so it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It must have been a bit of a risk for, maybe not a risk, but a bet for a company like Netflix, an American company. And I know Liberty is obviously American, but Formula One wasn't big in America at that time. I mean, a lot of people credit Drive to Survive with US fandom. So
Mm.
was that a bit of a bet? Did you know that Drive to Survive was going to have this effect on the sport globally, but especially in the US?
No, I mean, really, the credit goes to a guy at Netflix called Nat Gruhl, who's our executive on the show, and he's been at Netflix almost longer than anybody, I think. And he is our executive in charge of the show. Um, and he was the one that really worked the relationship with Formula One to try and get the show over the line. I mean, I can't really remember what he saw in Formula One as a property. I think he thought it was global, and it was maybe slightly opportunistic in the sense that the sport was kind of going nowhere fast. Excuse the
Hmm.
pun. I think, its ratings were slightly falling on terrestrial broadcasts like Channel 4 and stuff like that, I think. And so he really pushed for it and negotiated it. And to the second part of your question, I mean, no, I don't think anybody associated with the show thought it was going to land in the way that it did because, we had the benefit of opening relatively big, but then the show grew
Yeah.
rapidly over 2 or 3 years. Whereas most shows on Netflix, even big hits, decline
Yeah.
incrementally. It's kind of, or they hold, but very few things actually grow, very few things. But it grew really aggressively from quite a solid base. So, no, I think we were just all like, this is great. Let's just keep on going. You know, who knows
Yeah.
why things connect? And I think, there's always an element of timing. But
Yeah.
I mean, there may be somebody at Netflix with a scientific answer to that, but I don't know if there really is.
No, absolutely. I mean, you take it and run with it. What do you think are the ingredients that made it so successful, that allowed it to continue to grow? Was it the timing? Was it the pandemic? Like, why
Yeah.
did so many people latch on to this show and to this sport through the way you portrayed it?
I think pandemic was season two, wasn't it? So I think partly that. I think, it had, like I said, it had started big. I think it was also a total discovery show to Americans because, as you said, they literally hadn't really heard of Formula One, and Formula One had tried pretty ineptly to try and crack America over the last couple of decades. In a very amateurish kind of, well, everything's changed, hasn't it? But they did it in a quite clunky way, and it didn't work. And so, yeah, it's just about, like I said, it's the right thing at the right time, and for whatever reason, taking the helmet off these sort of variously attractive young men who are risking their lives in this kind of quite glamorous sport that seems global and kind of a bit other, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
caught people's imaginations. And I think that, in the established Formula One territories like the UK or, Germany or Holland or whatever, Italy, it sort of revitalized a sort of sleeping fan base into maybe looking at the show slightly differently. Having
Mhm.
said that, there's plenty of hardcore fans who don't like the show because it's not purist enough.
Yeah.
And then for America, it was like, what the hell is this? And it was purely a word of mouth hit in America, you
Wow.
know. And to get that younger demographic in America, I mean, that's the thing that it's done is that kids watch Formula One now, which
Yeah.
they just didn't ever. It was a very white male pale and stale kind of, viewership. So they've managed
Absolutely.
to. I think that's where the most, tractions come, and yeah, the rest is kind of history.
Absolutely. I mean, that was my origin story. I was the classic American Drive to Survive convert to Formula One.
Oh,
And here I
really?
am several years later, spending most of my free time on the sport. So thank you for that.
No, pleasure.
Yes. But you were mentioning this sort of arm wrestle that you do with teams. How much convincing do you have to do, I guess, from the beginning to get access to teams? And what's that process like? Is it on an ongoing battle, like you said?
It's not really an ongoing battle, but nobody in their right mind would want a camera in their face all day long. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, it's never ceases to amaze me. And on any of the projects we do that people sign up for it, but thank God they do. But it's listen, some people, just generally speaking, some people are more comfortable and more willing to be on camera than other people, inevitably. Um, I think because it landed pretty big, Mercedes and Ferrari weren't in season one. And
Hmm.
I think they saw the impact and they're like, right, let's get into season two. And so I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for them. They don't necessarily love doing it, but they know that it's massively boosted the profile of the sport.
Yeah.
And to be fair to them, they're incredibly good-natured the vast majority of the time, in the sense of they give us good access or as good access as they can for professional sports teams, because they genuinely do have better things to do than that. So it's always that kind of thing of like trying to make them understand, and you have to sort of continue to repeat this. You know, we just want you to do what you do. If you give us good access into what you do, then it'll make the whole process a lot easier. If you give us terrible access, that's when it gets really difficult for us because we've got to do something with it. And you end up trying to kind of put a square peg into a round hole because you haven't really got what you need.
Yeah.
So, different teams, different methodologies or different kind of rhythms. Um, but in the main, they're pretty good, and it's been very mutually beneficial, and so, it won't go on forever. So we'll have to see what happens when the music
Don't say
stops. And
that.
well, tell me about it.
Yeah. Is there a team or a driver who's been surprising to you in terms of their openness or their candor in production? I won't ask the opposite question, but
Yeah, that'd be pretty obvious. Listen, Danny Rick's been great
yeah.
historically, and he's actually, he just gave us his last interview because obviously hasn't got to see it anymore. I just watched him in a cut the other day, and it's so emotional. I know Danny a tiny bit from over the years, and he's been such an ambassador for the show and for the sport, and just to see him sign off was pretty emotional. And Lando's great. I mean, they're all pretty good. I mean, unfortunately it is easier to highlight who's not great.
Yeah.
And I think most people know who that is, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's
It
horses
happens.
for courses, right?
Exactly. I think for some teams and athletes, like you were mentioning, the highs and lows of sport can be very private moments. People don't always want a camera in their face. How do you reckon with that as a production company, putting them on screen and deciding what goes in and what doesn't?
Well, I mean, you sort of have to find a balance between dealing in reality, which is human nature, and ethics on some level. And I think they're fundamentally, you know, we're all voyeurs in some capacity. You all want to see those raw moments when shit's going down. You just
Yeah.
do. That's what people watch Formula One because they want to see crashes. I mean, it's just reality. Um, Obviously not entirely or purely, but there's an element of that. And so, we all like to see people under pressure survive or collapse or cope or not cope, in whatever form that takes. And I think, so in answer to your question, you just have to use common sense and good judgment. So, we've had certain scenes where drivers have been really vulnerable, and sometimes they're okay with showing that, and sometimes they're not. And
Yeah.
there's actually quite a clean editorial guide track between what they sort of notionally are allowed to have editorial input into. And it's very IP based, it's not human based. So
Interesting.
actually, the stuff that we do, any changes we make are out of respect for the relationship or as opposed to out of respect for the contract. So it's sort of you just take it on a case by case basis, and
Yeah.
you're not going to get somebody to give you more access next year if you've stitched them up this year. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you've got to be smart about it. But at the same time, you've got to push for authenticity, and that's what went down. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I that kind of leads into my next question. Do teams get any sort of right of refusal or right of review, or is it just simply IP related?
It is review, and it's probably expanded a little bit over the years. And as we've got to know the sport a bit more and got to know the individuals and the teams a bit more. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the contract says; it's about the relationship. So,
Yeah.
if somebody says, "Oh, I really didn't mean to say that," it's going to look terrible, especially if you don't put it in like full context. Then you have to take a view. And obviously, this season, there's been some pretty heavy off-track stuff happening, which we're having to cover, but you've got to do it in such a balanced way so that it's even-handed.
Yeah.
And That's quite a responsibility actually, because it's people's lives and it's people's employment and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's tricky, but we always get there in the end. We always get to place with teams because listen, they will always push for more and more control, and you
Yeah.
just have to kind of fight back.
Absolutely. Is there a moment that didn't make the cut that you wish you had, that you wish had? Doesn't necessarily have to be a sensitive moment, but something that didn't
Oh,
make it in.
millions. I mean, there's a sort of slightly long-standing joke that because we filmed at Checo's wedding a couple of years ago, and we didn't make the cut. As
Oh no.
I think it might have done latterly as a flashback or something, but it's a bit it was a bone of contention for a couple of years, understandably. But no, people always ask me this question. I can never remember. There's always great scenes every year that we have to not include for more purely editorial reasons. But
Yeah.
no, that was the one that definitely caused us the most trouble.
What percent of footage makes it in? I mean, I imagine you all are capturing so much day to day.
I think the ratio is something like 20 to 1, so 5%,
Okay. Interesting.
something like that.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about storylines, like we're at the beginning of 2025, the season hasn't started, but obviously off-track stuff is happening all the time. What proportion of storylines are pre-planned versus reactionary? What happens in the beginning of the year when you're sitting down to plan for the
Yeah.
season?
I'm not so involved these days in this part, but I
Yeah.
will jump in at some point because we're obviously editing at the moment. But um, we will sit down with the team and kind of go, okay, what, because you can sort of predict about 50% of what's going to happen in very
Mhm.
broad strokes, like, okay, this driver's probably going to get fired at some point, or this driver's going to move. And obviously, there's been a lot of movement in the drivers' market in the last year, so that's going to settle down for a bit. So, yeah, we do. We do have a story meeting at the very beginning, and it sort of shape shifts, and you know, the paddock's a pretty porous place. So if
Yeah.
you hang around the paddock long enough, you kind of get to hear pretty much everything. I mean, it's the not one person in that whole precinct can keep a secret as far as I can tell,
That makes
which is
for
quite
good
good.
good TV. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I have to ask, what's your favorite Drive to Survive episode or storyline to date?
I mean, it's really predictable this, but I do love Man on Fire just because it's such a.
So
I was
good.
actually
Yeah.
here. I'm in Sussex at my place in the country, and I was actually watching it here because I wasn't at the race when Roman had that crash, and I was like, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, that guy's dead." I just thought,
Wow.
and obviously, amazingly and brilliantly, he wasn't. But I am. I think that episode's pretty intense. But I mean, how could it not be?
Yeah.
It was the most unbelievable escape from a fireball car nightmare scenario you could ever possibly imagine. But I mean, listen, we cut it to pieces and kind of went mad with it as you would, but it was
Yeah.
great fun to make, knowing that he made it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And do you
What's yours?
have, sorry, my
What's your
favorite
favorite
episode?
episode?
I have to say, I really loved the Alpine episode last year with Otmar and the Bonjour. I just thought like the way that that was captured, an American kind of coming into a French team, I thought was so brilliantly done in
Oh,
kind of
right, okay.
subtle, funny ways. So I thought that one was really incredible.
Good. We miss Otmar.
Yeah, we do. So for season seven, what can you tell us about what's in store for us? Anything?
It's quite a juicy year, obviously,
It
because all the
is.
drivers out of contract and moving around. I mean, the Lewis move and the knock-on effect of that obviously is pretty profound. We try a few things differently this year in terms of how we build the episodes, which I
Hmm,
unfortunately can't really talk about. But it's
of course.
it's really refreshing to have. I think it's three episodes that are like, are noticeably different from anything that's gone before in the way that they're shot or delivered or constructed. So that's good. But yeah, listen, all the storylines are out there, but it's Carlos Sainz obviously has a big role to play this year. We've got great access to Lando this year, as he fights for the championship, which is super, super compelling and
Wow.
exciting. And then, like I said, there's a couple of nice surprises in some of the episodes, which are very driver focused. Just trying to think what else. I mean, it's all the Danny Rick goodbye, as I said, is really
Oh
emotional.
no.
Um, no, I know what I love about him. He was so candid and honest with us
Yeah.
in his final interview in a way that not many of those drivers are, in the sense of one's appetite for danger and risk as you get older and that kind of stuff, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. Um,
Absolutely.
no, I think it's a solid season. I think it's good this year.
Yeah. Well, we're very excited. I bet fans are not ready for what's coming for them, especially on the Daniel Ricciardo front. It'll feel like a wound reopening, but in the best way, I'm sure, just
Mm.
to kind of see that face to face. But one question I have is in Formula One, this is true, but I think this is probably true of any sports league. How do you balance giving time to all teams and all drivers or players versus just the stars?
Yeah, it's hard because some teams just are more interesting than others,
Yeah.
and some teams aren't very competitive. But we've got a very good episode this year about the battle for sixth place, which is kind of brilliant. I think it is hard. We try to be even-handed, but we can't always be entirely even-handed just because we've sort of got to follow the action to some extent,
Yeah.
because it is largely still dictated by that, but not entirely. But we do have a kind of an instruction to be even-handed, but we're getting there. It's not fully balanced, but we're trying to redress it a little bit. Um, so yeah, it's difficult. It's also an incredibly difficult show to make,
Yeah.
because it's 10 episodes is a lot. Access is good, but it's a bit fragmented, and so it's a really, really challenging edit, like really challenging, as are most access shows, I think, actually. But so therefore we do try to be balanced, but at the same time, we've got to get 10 episodes out the door, so you can't be too precious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think this model works for all sports, or are there certain attributes of some that make it better than others?
Well, I think what's good about Formula One is that it's literally a four-wall precinct, right? That
Yeah.
paddock is a actual space with sides where nobody can escape. So they're basically, or on the track, but it's like this very self-contained mini world that just bounces off itself all the time.
Mm,
And so it's kind of a gift in a way, because you literally just stand there pointing the camera in different directions, picking up things, because people are just doing that to each other all the time within this kind of relatively small space. And they're all trying to beat each other, and they've all fucked each other over, and they're all trying to sue each other. They all used to work for each other. They're all had affairs with each other's wives. No, maybe not, but you know what I mean. It's like it's a very incestuous world. They've all had love affairs, professionally. They've all fallen out. They've all worked. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's so much
Yeah.
history and blood and guts in the paddock that it's pretty juicy. And I think that a team structure, especially two drivers trying to beat that, so two people on the same team trying to
Yeah.
beat each other. I mean, that's a gift in itself.
Yeah.
So having done a lot of solo sports like golf and tennis and stuff, Tour de France, actually that's a team sport, but the solo stuff is fascinating in a different way because they're so isolated. So
Yeah.
we made a show called Breakpoint, which we sadly we only did for 2 seasons, but I loved it because I love the mad psychology of tennis because
Yeah.
people think tennis is a nice game. It's not. It's a horrible game. It's mental torture. It's mental anguish, and it's kind of like very lonely. Only the top sort of five having this kind of idealized life. The rest of them are grinding.
Yeah.
And it was interesting actually because I think it doesn't afford you so much soap opera though, and I think that that's what people like about Formula One is that it's just like it's sexy young drivers and it's kind of arguing team bosses and it's kind of like it's a sexy world.
Yeah.
Tennis isn't sexy in the same way. It's kind of a cool sport. I love the actual game of tennis; is amazing, but it was harder to get an audience to kind of be intrigued. I mean, I think what the difference was, tennis fans love Breakpoint, but we couldn't get it to work for non-tennis fans.
Yeah. I
Whereas
loved
Driving
it. I loved it. I wasn't an avid tennis fan before I watched it, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was an incredible way
I thought
to
we had some great show. I thought we had some great
yeah.
episodes, really good access, and I thought some of the players really went there in a fascinating way. So, yeah, we were heartbroken we couldn't continue it, but we live in a very brutal, algorithm-driven world where there's no room for
Absolutely.
sentiment.
Yeah, I'm sure you're seeing so much change on the media and the entertainment side of the business. But how do you choose your projects, whether that's which sports to cover or other topics? How does that typically come about?
Well, we're all massive sports nuts in the company, so that helps. So it's like almost like we'll give any sport consideration until. But we kind of know who might buy what because we've been doing it for
Yeah.
quite a long time now. And that is changing to your earlier point. I mean, the landscape is rapidly changing, and it's sort of got to this slightly terrifying place now. If it doesn't have an influencer in it, then nobody's interested, which is kind of great, kind of tragic. So it is shifting a lot. It's the kind of blurring of sport and entertainment that's really changing rapidly. And listen, nothing stays the same forever. It's like, you know, everything's cyclical. So once you know that, you go, well, that type of show is gonna everything has a shelf life, you
Yeah.
know. So the fact that we've already done 7 seasons of Drive Survive is amazing, and hopefully we'll do a few more. But the nature of our slate is changing to reflect what the buyers want.
Yeah.
We do like, we're doing some super high-end documentaries in sport, which are more like art films. Then you got Drive Survive on this end of the spectrum. Then there'll be some influencer-driven stuff. There'll be some live stuff. There'll be lots of short-form stuff. I'm meant to give a big plug to our YouTube channel, by the way, which we're rapidly building at the moment. So Box to Box YouTube,
Absolutely.
please go and check it out. Subscribe.
We will
Um,
link that in the description.
Brilliant. It's early days, but so yeah, it is. It's it's an interesting thing to be a part of because it is evolving and it's challenging. But it's all. Listen, we probably do 75% sport and 25% other stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's the unscripted market's been in a challenging environment for the last 3 or 4 years, apart from sports. So we've been very fortunate in that we've sort of managed to make hay while that particular sun has been shining.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see how it shifts. I mean, the way consumers and sports fans even watch sports is rapidly changing. People aren't necessarily sitting down to watch a 2 hour live game or live race anymore. They're watching highlights, they're interacting with people over
Yeah.
social media, they're engaging with more entertainment content. And we're seeing Amazon, Apple, Netflix get into sort of some of the live sports dynamic as
Yeah.
well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. I think
But it's
2025.
what's so great about it, and my sport is endlessly fascinating because it's just constant drama. If there
Yeah.
aren't many things in the world which you can't predict the outcome of, every day there's probably 100 different offerings of some
Yeah.
dramatic content in the sports world. So there will always be sports content. It just depends on how, as you say, how it's created and
Yeah.
ingested.
Absolutely. Well, James, thank you so much for this. This is an incredible conversation. Our listeners are going to be so excited, and we can't wait for the next season.
Amazing. Listen, lovely to meet you. Thank you for your time. And yeah, let's do it again.
Perfect.